As you develop more skills in dealing with workplace conflict, it kind of becomes a superpower. If you can quickly calm someone down and get them a little bit more settled so that there's a buy in to something that you're telling them to do or responding to a complaint, the more effective you are at helping the other person to feel heard. What it often means is that you can get to the same outcome in much less time and often with much less stress along the way. But it also might mean that you're able to get to even better outcomes than before. And active listening is a key part of that. In the video today, I'll be talking about a particular framework that I use when I'm delivering conflict resolution training as a model that works for helping someone to feel heard. People usually don't feel understood when you say something like, I understand, particularly when you follow it with the word but. I understand that, but. As soon as we use the word but, it kind of erases whatever we said before. So that's a particularly, I think, unfortunate error that people very often fall into simply because they haven't considered the nuances of their language. So, for example, using the word and instead of but, it sounds like this is what's going on for you, and at the same time, this is our position or this is where we're coming from. In that way, we sort of develop the capacity to acknowledge and validate what the other person said, what they've expressed, including all of the thinking and all of the feeling that goes along with that, without implying judgment. And what we want to particularly avoid is implying criticism. I hope that the video is useful for you. If so, please consider pressing like and subscribe. Let's get into the first topic. The model that I've developed to help people develop the practical skills in active listening that they need for dealing with workplace conflict is based on the EAR acronym, EAR. And so what that stands for is explore, acknowledge, and respond. The first step is explore. We unpack and give the other person the opportunity to share their perspective. We clarify facts and information that they're expressing. We look for potential common ground and where there might be interest conflict that we may need to navigate. And we want to at least make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what we're talking about. There's a dual goal for that explore step in the process, though. Of course, we want to understand what they're saying and we want to get our head around their perspective and maybe think through options for convincing them to think differently, or maybe we are willing to consider thinking differently if they've shared something that we didn't already know. But we also, I think, in many situations when we're dealing with conflict, want to help the other person to calm down and want to help them to develop awareness and clarity around the issues. And for both of those goals, active listening is a really essential component as we reflect and sort of summarize and express and clarify and consider what the other person's sharing. What it also does is to help them hear it back. And so their brain is processing it, and it's likely then that they'll develop a finer grain level of detail in their understanding of the situation. So what that does then is inherently calm them down. The finer level of granular detail that we use to focus on, what it's doing is it's slowing down our thinking and avoiding from jumping to assumptions like this is a threat or this is an uncertain situation or things are slipping out of control. So we do want to understand the situation, but don't lose sight of the fact that part of your goal during conflict is also to help the other person to settle and then to develop awareness around what's important to them, how they're contributing to the problem, whether or not they're being realistic about what they're expecting of you, and all that kind of thing too. If you're wanting to develop the skills around that explore category, what I would suggest is focusing on a mix of open and closed ended questions, mirroring, and meaningful responses. So, closed ended questions are things like, have you told anybody else about this before telling me? Or is this the first time that that's happened? Or is it something that's been an issue for an extended period of time? These are sort of fixed choice questions, yes or no. It's the first time, it's not. Did you send them an email, or was that an in-person conversation that you had with my team member here? They're easier to answer, so when the other person's very escalated, those closed-ended questions can work really well because they don't tax the person's cognitive resources, so to speak. But you don't want to ask too many closed-ended questions in a row. Did you do this? Yes or no? Have you contacted them? Yes or no? Did you get approval then? Yes or no? It starts to feel a little bit like an interrogation, and we're upping the ante, increasing the sense of pressure, which might cause the other person to start to become worked up. So slow down, but maybe avoid asking too many of those closed-ended questions in a row. But particularly at the beginning of a conversation, if the other person's in a very heightened state, they can be a really useful tool. Open-ended questions are a little bit different. They're often questions like what and how. Asking too many of those at the beginning of a conversation might cause the other person to feel like they've been put on the spot, and they might then become a little bit defensive and reactive. So you probably want to keep them a little bit general. You certainly want to keep the tone neutral and curious. You don't want to imply judgment. So I wouldn't say something like, "Why the hell did you do that?" I would say something like, "What were you thinking at the time?" or "What were the factors that led to you deciding on that course of action?" What else was contributing to this from your perspective? What was that like for you? What other options did you consider? All of those are much better phrasings in terms of like share your perspective versus I'm judging you and prove that you're not an idiot or that you're not incompetent or that you're not dishonest or whatever the other implications are that we might inadvertently be sending. And by the way, the challenge with all of this is that those types of communication is in the eye of the receiver. Whether or not the message is perceived as criticism ultimately isn't something that we can control. But what we can do is to strategically choose the phrases and the words and the timing and the structure for our communication to minimize the chances of that defensiveness and resistance rising up. We can also use mirroring. This is basically where we repeat back a few of the words that the person said. I just can't believe this has happened. You could repeat, like sort of paraphrase. It sounds like it's really caught you off guard. Or we could repeat back literally the words that the person said. You can't believe that it's happened. No, I can't. I thought that we could trust you as a company, and that's why we've paid you good money. And this is the last thing that I expected. Okay, it's the last thing that you expected to happen. Yes, it is, because we did our research, and we certainly aren't to blame here. So what we're doing is kind of peeling the onion little bit by little bit. So he's actually talking about blame. So one of the things that we could do to reassure him in this instance would be to say something like, okay, so from your perspective, actually, there's nothing that you've done to contribute to the problem. And that makes sense then why you're requesting a full refund. The second step in that ear model is acknowledge. This is where we basically play back what the other person said to us. So we could say something like, gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds like this actually isn't the first time that your washing machine is broken. There have actually been issues with it over the past few months. You've tried your best to figure out what's going on, and it sounds like that's actually taken up quite a bit of your time, and it's reached the point now where you've decided enough's enough, so you're giving us a call to hopefully organize a replacement. Have I got that right? So we summarize what the person said, doing our best not to imply judgment or criticism. If there's contentious types of issues or facts that you're not sure about, or they're saying I'm being bullied by my manager and you're working in HR and you need to stay impartial in that situation, then you could say something like, okay, so from your perspective and from where you sit and from how you see things, this really does constitute bullying. So we can still summarize and acknowledge 100% without implying agreement, if that makes sense. The final step then in that active listening process is respond. This could be in the conversation itself, like a meaningful response, saying something like, gosh, this must be so frustrating having gone through all of that, or I'm so sorry, this isn't what we hope for our customers. You could say something like, look, thank you for flagging that with me. This is the next step. I'll need to get this person to get in touch with you. And building in as much certainty as possible around that is often something that's really helpful. And just strategically considering which response is suitable. If you decide to be firm, it doesn't mean that you have to be harsh or aggressive. You could still be professional and respectful and just say, look, I'm sorry, there's no flexibility here. This is the best that we could do. If you'd like to take us up on that, you've got my contact details. But in terms of that price that you're talking about, it's not something that we're really realistically going to be able to approve. I'm sorry. So just deciding how accommodating, how flexible, how assertive you need to be, and then taking the time to predict, plan, prepare, which hopefully increases the chances of executing. These are the types of steps that we often cover in conflict resolution training when I'm doing it with staff within organizations. So thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear from you which other topics around workplace conflict would be useful. Are you dealing with a particularly difficult personality at your workplace, or are you a team leader looking after a team and there's particular challenges that are going on? I'd love to hear from you, and I may even, if possible, incorporate that in a future episode and put that on a video on the channel too. So thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.